So I've been making notes all morning about what I want to say this afternoon, but I'm kind of interspersed what I say with various tips and hints as I go along. And the first of those is that if you want to be bigged up, as I have just been, get someone else to do it for you. Yeah. Whenever you get the chance, get somebody to introduce you, saying nice things about you. Because if you say them about yourself, it kind of loses credibility. So, thank you. I have to say that I think I might have written it out for her first and sent it in 16 points, so there's no chance for mistakes. So don't leave anything to chance either. People are saying, why do I take my shoes and socks off? And there are kind of two reasons for that. One is I suffer from hot feet. And it's quite comfortable actually to take my shoes and socks off. And the other is kind of about brand. And I think you need to have a brand. I think it's really important, however cheesy it might appear. And secondly, I'm not saying about the screen. And secondly, I think we're in a time when you have to tread carefully, where you have to let people see your vulnerability. And there's something wonderfully vulnerable and strange about feet, that you don't normally see, but we know we all have. And I guess I could develop it further, but then it gets rude, so I won't go there. So if any of you feel the urge to kind of remove footwear, remove footwear and show some solidarity, then please do. I should also warn those of you who weren't in my morning session that I kind of might have got a few of them wound up with all sorts of terrible things. So just tolerate a bit of unusualness as we go along. A couple of questions for you. Do you know what drove Louis Pasteur to invent pasteurisation? Okay, I'll tell you, yeah. The reason was he lost 3 children to typhoid. Yeah. So what that says to me is that people who are driven by personal tragedy or experience are driven to do things which others consider impossible. And that is kind of the USP of people who are in that social entrepreneurship world. Yeah? So the bureaucrats and the boring corporate find it really difficult to understand that passion that makes people in your world keep going and keep going and keep going. Giving you a clue now, why do you think Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone? It wasn't to place bets. His wife was deaf, yeah. No, you have to question the sanity of a man that does that. But he invented a telephone because both his wife and his mother were deaf, and there's something vaguely Freudian about that, which we won't go into. Right, okay, so the subject is about grant addiction, and that was a slightly scary moment for me, but I think somebody organised that on purpose. I have this sort of feeling that an awful lot of charities and organisations grow into the grant addiction almost by, it's kind of the easy path, isn't it? It's you start off with a small grant, sort of the split of the business funding world, and then you get offered something a bit stronger and harder and bigger. Then you grow your organisation. And before you know where you are, you're around the back of Cardiff railway station, getting all sorts of nasty stuff, and you're completely hooked. And then that's how funding kind of works, and you get some really big organisations delivering really valuable services, which are totally reliant on public sector funding, where the original vision has been completely lost, and then they're in that place where the pusher then has to go home because their funding's been cut, the council. And you're stuck kind of in that detox situation, and that's kind of where you go, and I think that's quite scary, and that's where I think a lot of people are right now, and it's really hard to recover from that. And I suppose an example of that I would use would be two national mental health charities, Mind and Rethink. And I used to think originally I think they started out that Mind dealt with minor depression, anxiety, that kind of stuff, low-level mental ill health, and lots of really good stuff at well-being. And Rethink really were focused around the real, I won't say hardcore, but the really severe end of the mental health world. Today they compete aggressively for the same contracts because they're about 95% reliant on government funding, and that's a really scary place to be, especially right now. So for me, it's about coming away from that, and that is quite a difficult journey. I'm a big fan of both of Dad's Army and also of Andrew Mawson. Anybody here met Andrew Mawson, Lord Mawson? He was an amazing guy. He went to a derelict, kind of semi-derelict church in East London, where he says there were 7 old ladies back in their odds for the afterlife, and empty buildings and not much else going on. And he kind of created the Bromley by Bow Centre, which was, at its day, completely groundbreaking and new, where he trusted the ordinary people who wanted to do extraordinary things. And when you hear him speak or read his book, he talks about how he did all that sort of stuff. And he challenged all the time the perceptions held by the large organisations. I think he talks a lot about the NHS. He said you can't have a healthy living centre. Of course, now we all have healthy living centres, but he kind of started it. And he talks about, never miss the opportunity presented by a good crisis. So the crisis that the world is in right now is a crisis that you can benefit from in terms of growing your organisations, although often I guess you're starting from a point of being like, oh my goodness, where am I right now? It's all rather scary. Do you know what the national debt is in the UK right now, per person? Doesn't know whether they're just emerged yesterday in the maternity hospital or whether they're 110 years old and hanging in there. Do you know how many £1,000 it is per person? 16.5. So a lot of people don't earn that around here, do they? So where's the money going to come from to pay that off? It isn't going to come from tax on Starbucks and Amazon's profits in the UK. We know that now for a fact. And it's interesting too that people are being encouraged by the national press to go shopping in places other than Amazon. And that's a sign, that's a tipping point, I think, of a fundamental societal change, a cultural change in that country that says that I'd rather the profit on my coffee or my purchase, the tax on that profit, is used to help people that I actually care about or I meet or I encounter in my everyday life. And that is kind of a national trend that the big corporates will have to deal with, that you guys are in there first and can exploit. I mean exploit. Because if you don't gain ground in that space, I think you'll kind of get trodden on as they reinvent corporate social responsibility to be something slightly more inclusive than it is right now. Slightly more useful than it is right now, but probably nowhere near as useful as it would be if you were working with them to do it. And then, of course, we had all this big society stuff, didn't we, which is Cameron's way of saying we're all going to have a wonderful time and do it ourselves. And everybody said, well, that's going to be a bunch of sort of amateurs like Dad's Army, all bumping around and doing stuff. And the reality is it's much more like the Land Army. We've had the Second World War. I know people who are I still know one or two people who are Land Army girls, and they were pretty well organised. They knew what they were doing, and they kind of made stuff happen. So it can be done, but it kind of needs to be led from the grassroots. Again, the farming analogy works there for me as well. It's not about waiting for people at the top. It's not about waiting for somebody from the Welsh Assembly to come and talk to you about how good it all is this morning, because they may not turn up. You have to kind of just work out what you want to do and go for it yourselves. This slide should just build up gently and give you a couple of giggles, and then we'll move on to some more serious stuff. How do people react to all this stuff? Well, the media, poor bloke, he died last week, but the media are in a really hard place. Everybody's going online, and no one's buying newspapers anymore. So the more negative, inflammatory, nasty stuff they can print in papers, the more they'll sell. So you can't believe what you read in the paper. Stephen Fry, by the way, has more Twitter followers than there are readers of national daily newspapers in this country. Yeah, if you want to get news out there, get Stephen to retweet it. Don't send a press release to the Times. Do you remember Quangos? They were everywhere, weren't they? And they were really shifty, and they seem to have kind of disappeared. But I think there's still some lurking. But we do seem to live on Western and Quango free Britain now, don't we? They've all disappeared. And then, of course, you get the poultry sector. We're doing something fantastic. How dare you take our money away? I know we need 20 people for every service user. It's really important. Don't look at my balance sheet. Give me the bloody money. And of course, those are English third sector organisations. In Wales, things are completely different. And then you get local government. And I have to say, I formed a very close attachment, not in a physical sense, but in an intellectual sense, I think, with Merrill this morning, who I was really impressed with, a politician. You don't get politicians often that say, I said to her, isn't the Localism Act fantastic? And she said, yes. Normally they say, what act? And for me, so just as Louis Pasteur was driven by passion, yeah, this stuff's all about entrepreneurship. And that's a picture of the Berlin Wall coming down. And I think that passion, that entrepreneurial attitude is what breaks walls down. And interestingly, enterprise and process is what makes walls appear. And you need structure, but you start with a passion. Otherwise, you get the structure in the wrong place. So when you go to social enterprise events and they talk about structure, CRC, IPS, limited by guarantee, lots of other things, new code, can't ignore, I would just say ignore all of that and just concentrate on the passion. What's your equivalent, personally or organisationally, of that Louis Pasteur moment of decision to do something about the thing that was really making your life hell, or the life of those you care about? And big society, again, is kind of a like it or love it, and I don't do politics, but I love winding up politicians. It is very much about a philosophy. It's a vision, it's a hope, it's a dream, and the crystal ball in number 10 isn't necessarily working as well as it should. Is that frown? Are you right down there? No, that's okay. Okay, I thought I was going to get into it. And the localism act is a toolkit to make this stuff happen. I was saying to the workshop this morning, if you Google, look at some of the Guardian coverage of the Localism Act. It says you're reading all the turgid documents, but there's some fantastic things that you can do. You have a right to take over or to request to take over community building. You have first refusal on those. You can demand to get involved with running services that you feel strongly about. There's 1,001 things that you can do, and nobody's doing them right now. And my kind of view, my sort of plea, I guess, is that as we look at the run-up to the next general election, the people that can be the case studies that will get used in the battle will be the people that are the early adopters of all of this stuff right now. So what I wanted to do is give just a few examples of things I do and projects I'm kind of into really and working on, just to set the scene, and then I was going to give you these 7 steps, because I mustn't forget the 7 steps, because that's what I'm here to talk about. But as I said, I do tend to work between organisations, and there are always things that they want to do that kind of can't happen. And when people say things can't happen, that means they've worked out why it can't happen, and then it means that you can make it happen. So I've been working with a special needs school in Norfolk, and they want to build a new school. They basically look at the statistics, they've got half as much space as they should have, and twice as many young people, and the school needs to grow. But the one thing that the government, in any shape or form, be it a local authority or be it national government or be it anyone, is that they won't let you borrow capital. Capital projects are like a massive no-no right now, because it seems to get all consolidated onto the national debt, which everybody looks at, and then they don't like it. So even though 10, 50 million quid I want for this school is just a drop in the ocean of national debt, it's a step too far for those that have to authorise it. And so we found a way of repaying, of servicing that debt by putting a residential unit next to the school. And the residential unit will enable the local authority to commission in this case, a third sector provider, a local charity that works with kids with special needs, actually providing respite care and holidays to provide boarding accommodation. The cost saving is about £70,000 or £80,000 a year per child, unbelievably. And 10 times that is what will cover the cost of leasing a new school. And you say, how could you lease a new school? Well, you lease a new school in somewhere that you lease a ship. You don't have it horribly firmly fixed to the ground. You have a modular build school that can be taken away if they default on the repayment. And to my total amazement, as I've progressed this hypothesis and argument with various sort of partner organisations, as you do, including one of those big sort of ones that everybody complains about in private eye, Capita, you find that people are very receptive to this kind of approach. And you find that the people that you thought were going to say no are starting to say yeah, they're sort of with you. And then it becomes their idea. And then you step back a bit and start helping them do what they want to do, which actually is what you wanted to do in the first place. And so anything really is possible. And so in many ways, I wrote here, I'm not sure if it's quite the right thing to say, it was late on the train last night, but it's kind of, yes, there's dinosaur in terms of attitude, is often today's pussycat. You just stroke them a bit and they'll roll over, you can tickle their tummy and do anything. So if you've had battles with people in the public sector in the past or anything like that, don't necessarily think that they're going to be hard work today, because they might not be. So from these children to sort of death, which is another hot topic in Britain. Fascinating when you read that the number of people aged 80 and over in this country will double by 2030. And I'll only be 75 by then, so I won't be one of them. So as all these baby boomers get older, they're going to be hugely demanding of services, and hospices are part of that. And hospices, traditionally, I think you have some great hospices in Wales, they're traditionally only a third funded by the NHS, and they have a really tough business model and lots of things that are really difficult to do. And I've been working with a bunch of very, very passionate people who are trying to create a hospice as a standalone building with a major capital appeal in the most deprived part of East Anglia, and failing totally. And what we've found is by partnering them with other organisations, you get a more sustainable model. So as they wanted to build that perfect vision, I mean, one of their trustees is 90 and was involved in the founding the first hospice in London in 1960 something, and it kind of the world's moved on. So where they'll end up is something completely different to what they first envisaged, i.e. a wing in a new community kind of hospital facility. So compromise is also a very, very important thing right now, I think. You have to kind of move from where you might want to go, somewhere just a little bit different to work with other people. And also very interesting to me, because I've born in Essex, is I'm doing some work in Colchester. And Colchester is kind of interesting because it has an area called the Hythe, which was the former docks, and in fact it was the Roman port. So it's a really, really long-established port. The river's silted up, everything's been knocked down, the various blocks of flats have been built, and there's a massive, massive standoff between the landowners, some of which is the local authority, some of which are private landowners, the developers who can't make a profit, the huge and growing need for affordable housing, and the fact that there's a river which is tidal, goes up and down, and half of the town want it to be level and pretty and have kind of like tops of flowers around it and boats and cafes, and half want to protect the habitat for the wading birds that like to peck at the worms. And it was going nowhere fast. And what we're doing there, the localism stuff, is we're creating a development trust and a community land trust, which are kind of off-the-shelf solutions that mean that you can get everybody round the table together to get that consensus that you need to make things happen. So you have a board of directors of an organisation where some are from the community, some are from the local authority, and some are from developers and funders. And then you find out what the problem is. The real problem is that they need to do something with the river that costs 15 million quid, and they haven't got 15 million quid. And then you find out that the changes to the rules around the way that public sector, the local government pension funds are administered. I think it was in Heseltine's report that 33%, a third of the assets in local government pension funds can be used for infrastructure projects if they obviously meet all the criteria of giving a good return and protecting pensioners' rights, etc., and future income. And then I looked at Essex, and guess how much money they've got in their pension fund in Essex? 3.4 billion. How much am I looking for? 7 million actually to match a European bid. Their biggest property asset is £13 million, which is property in Dean Street in Soho. And you think, wouldn't it be nice if they could sell that place in Soho and spend money in their own town? And so the other thing for me about where is the money, and we're all chasing after the money, and the money's all where it's gone from where we thought it was, but actually there's lots of money sitting in other places where you can get to. So already corporate pension funds are investing in housing associations. Nigel talked this morning about bond issues and things. There's already pension fund money going into social housing. Wouldn't it be great if all the social landlords, the housing associations, borrowed money from the pension funds within their areas to build the houses that everybody needs to see happen? How was the recession in the 1930s solved with all that urban sprawl that we see around every town in England, England, Wales and Scotland and everywhere else? So it's kind of all there, but it's kind of locked and stuck. And what I think is it needs people like us and all of us to kind of campaign for that stuff, tweet about it, talk about it, ask questions about it. And again, with the Colchester example, when I actually spoke to the people, the leader of the council, he wasn't, well, clearly he wasn't averse because it wasn't his pension pot, but he wasn't averse to the idea, and nor were the officers. Because they saw it as being a chance to be innovative at relatively low risk And so for me, the money is there. There's just not where you might look for it first of all. And so those kind of 7 steps, and 7 steps is always good. I think there are 7 steps at Alcoholics Anonymous, aren't there? I'm sure nobody here would know. I've got a friend who was a heavy drug user, and now he works in a private rehab clinic in Thailand, and he said there are 7 steps around the drug thing. So I thought, let's think about the 7th step for social enterprise. And the first one is that you really, really, really need to know what it is you want to do. So at the workshop I ran this morning, I've got people to work out what they want to do. And it's really difficult. Someone said, what do you do? The mission trip, you started doing this, you're now doing that. You might have a rebrand along the way. National Charity Rethink used to be the National Schizophrenia Fellowship. There's not much fellowship. Schizophrenia isn't all what's about anymore, and kind of like do anything you want to do if you'll pay them for it. Nothing wrong with that, but that's kind of where they got to. It's quite hard then to work out what it is you want to do, because you lost sight of that original mission. And there can be dissociation. I met recently a really interesting organisation called FARA, F-A-R-A, and it was founded by a lady who worked in Romania and the orphanages, all that horrible stuff that we saw in the 80s. And the youngsters that were saved from there are now kind of slightly damaged adults living in kind of communities. And she funds a whole social enterprise in northern Romania with some very upmarket charity shops in West London. So social consciousness in West London is kind of a nice thing to do, and it's not a big deal. And I suspect that bric-a-brac and tat in West London is worth more than it is in Llanelli. So it's sort of, you make more money, and it works, and it works for her. And so she's got a lovely breathing space to develop her organisation and enterprises in Romania to the point that they become financially self-sufficient. So she's very commercially gone for where the cash is to create the money she needs to deliver the need. So really understand what you want to do. As kind of change is inevitable. In the example I was talking about earlier, the group I talked to, I talked about a charity that has a time-served 68-year-old chief executive who's kind of third sector through and through. She really thinks that profit is only spelled with PH and never with an F. And she's just really worried about change and doesn't like it. And so they do frontline services. And so when I said, well, there's a fantastic lottery program that started that you can give you the opportunity to start a dialogue with those people that you know about that do similar things to you, so you can collaborate and work together and potentially partner, and who knows, maybe one day merge. And I had her right at the beer. She said, yes, Robert, would you like some more coffee? Because it was like denial, in a way, just a step too far. Just couldn't really make that leap, which is really, really difficult. Doing nothing, I think, is very much not an option. And then, of course, you need a realistic plan. A plan that isn't just saying we're going to do more every year. Years and years ago, I was a fertiliser rep. So whereas Nigel will tell you the story this morning, his mother was born here, I went to the Carmarthenshire show in 1980-something as a rep for a fertiliser company, and found that nobody was speaking English anywhere near me. That's quite a scary experience. But one thing I learned selling fertiliser, one of the things I learned, was that when you kind of had your targets and you fiddled them, so every year you get to sell more, we got to the point where the guy at the top said, do you know what, guys, the way you're going at the moment, in 3 years' time, we'll have 120% of the UK market. And then sort of reality had to kick. Because I was newly married, I had a young family, and if you hit your targets and exceeded them, you got lots of nice vouchers to go and spend in the shops, and we needed it right then, that was quite important. And the next one is kind of tough, because you have to do this. Everybody in the world at the moment is losing people. I find it amazing when I see the statistics for the local authorities near me, when they say how many jobs they've lost in the last 2 years. And I kind of, at the grassroots level, you kind of wonder what's changed. So of course, lots has changed. The youth service has disappeared in my part of the world completely. But you have to do some of that as well. So if organisations are carrying too much weight, you either have to get people doing different things or lose some people, and that's kind of the harsh reality of the journey. And also some organisations will get left behind. Anybody come across Tom Hughes Hallett? He ran Mary Curie, just retired. Tom Hughes Hallett, really interesting bloke. He's part of the family that set up the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. So a really good guy to network with, if you can get hold of him, which is difficult to try. But Tom Hughes Hallett, I heard him he was doing a talk in Cambridge, and I was there, and he said, do you know, he said there are 57 prostate cancer charities in Britain. And I was completely blown away. I thought, how could there be 57 prostate cancer charities in Britain? And I rather cheekily tweeted something along the lines of that this was duplication you could put your finger on, but sorry. So somehow there has to be merge, there has to be consolidation, there has to be change, and you just got to. I think we just all have to accept it and deal with it. Number 5 then is about putting prices on things, and I just think it's really, really, really important. So again, the charity I talked about earlier that I suggested might be in denial, I exaggerated it a little bit because they are kind of developing and moving. But we put together a tariff, so everything they do has a price on it. Everything they do. When they looked at their contract with the local authority, the one that's being kind of withdrawn, everything on it was that everything that was listed as the outcomes the council wanted were things that you couldn't measure. Which in good times is fantastic because you can do what you want. But in bad times it means you can't demonstrate where the value is. And so kind of it all disappears. So I think price on everything and know what it costs. And then even if it's a free service you're providing, the service user knows what it might cost. If I go back to hospices, I kind of wonder why people who are using a hospice don't know what it costs for them to be there. Because they kind of, being blunt, there's sort of a legacy market there, isn't there? And sometimes people want to help. And you don't sort of give them a leaflet and a form to sign when they're kind of, in the last few days. That would be really, really inappropriate. But making it part of the marketing of the organisation that people know what it costs, that you can sponsor a day for X, then that is very appropriate. But they kind of don't do that. So I think you've got to be very overt. If you go to a coffee shop or a restaurant that has a menu outside with a price list, I think it's a law that you have to have the menu outside the restaurant with a price list. Why haven't you got that outside a social enterprise or a charity? We had a great conversation this morning about patrons, and often a good patron of a charity can be a mentor. And I think that mentoring is really important. And I think that just as we're talking about going through lots of change as a sector, and I think the whole world is as well. And going back to my point about Starbucks and Amazon and people like that who are being kind of reminded by consumer demand that it'd be nice to pay more tax in this country, not because it's illegal not to, but because it would be nice to see it spent. There's going to be a whole swathe of up-and-coming managers in organisations looking to understand what this social impact is all about, looking to understand what social enterprise is all about, who can go back in and kind of steer the way their organisations work as they evolve and develop and become more socially focused as well as customer focused. And working with organisations like yours is like a really important way that they can get that experience. And so mentoring, internships, volunteering can go up a level or 2 or 3 or 4, I think. I think it's really, really kind of quite important. And the last thing is really quite interesting because when organisations have a tight time, particularly if they're charities, I find that the trustees want to measure everything, except the things that really matter. There's a huge temptation when times are tough to get into sort of massive micromanagement. And I have people who say, I have so many meetings, but I can no longer run my organisation. I've got this committee, that committee, trustees here, trustees there, everything's up for scrutiny. And this is kind of happening in the public sector too. So my local authority can't spend more than £500 on consultancy without it being sort of scrutinised, listed and put out in the public domain. Which means they make grants to organisations who pay the consultants for them, which is a needless kind of loop that they go through. But But that isn't, those aren't the issues. So measuring the wrong things is not going to help. I think it's about working out what the really important things are and measuring those. I love Nigel's comment this morning about, there's a kibble that talked about just how much people rate the organisation. That's kind of really quite important. And there's so much I think in the current times and culture about everything being sort of dumbed down and drab and sad and unhappy, and it's about being happy and celebrating and pushing as well. And kind of measuring some fun things, just a few fun things, as well as key things that you have to do. And I was interested by this, and I've used this sort of slide for quite a long while now, because I haven't updated it lately. But I was really interested how kind of the fair trade movement has in so many ways led where perhaps social enterprise is going. And so the original beard and sandals or barefoot cafe owner with the fair trade coffee round the corner in a pretty awful location would draw a certain clientele. Now that all the big guys are doing fair trade, it's become a very different kind of animal. And if you think about the beneficiaries of that fair trade movement, well, that's the East African coffee growers who have a far better deal than they ever had before. And the only real loser is the early adopter. And so sometimes the early adopters are really important in terms of making that iconic change, but tragically they don't kind of necessarily feature in the bigger picture. And so I sort of, this is sort of winding towards question time, I kind of wonder whether social enterprise as a term even will kind of stay with us forever. I think people are already starting to use phrases like social business. And I think it's almost a way of doing business which will become very different. A much more honest and open and transparent way of addressing that triple bottom line, sort of profit, people, planet, which is kind of a bit old, but actually very, very current, and sort of what social enterprise is about. And I think that the big organisations will start to become more socially inclusive and do more stuff, and the public sector will become more commercial with seeing that. And the third sector will kind of be, for me, is kind of very much the gel and the expertise and the skills that can make all that stuff happen. And I think if you look forward past 20 years, you just see organisations, or businesses, or whatever they happen to be. And that's very much the kind of stuff that Philip Blond wrote about in his book Red Tory a little while ago, if you've read that. His sort of vision was that in the future every enterprise will be a social enterprise, but it just won't look like the ones we see right now. So just to kind of close, I think these are my 3 top tips really. If you don't get angry about it, then frankly it ain't going to work. You've got to get really angry, you've got to feel passion, because it will sustain you through all the bad times, but it will get you where you want to go. And there's nothing worse than somebody who's determined and angry and driven by passion. It really does get through places. There's also just a side thing here about determination as well. Did you know that James Dyson had about 5,000 prototypes for that vacuum cleaner before he got it right? How many people stop at 4.5? So just get, and for me, I liken it to being in that the bomber going over the North Sea in the war to drop my bombs on the other country that we had a war with, and all that. The thicker the flak gets, the closer you are to the destination, the closer you are to the target, and then you throw it, and then you're in a clear blue sky. And that's what I find the projects I work on. I think that's what you'll find too. So welcome, value, and cherish opposition, because that's really, really good. So get thinking. That's the second thing, and because it's about thinking differently. I know there's been sessions here today on creativity, on brand, and here on what we kind of did networking come this. And the most important thing of all is keep going. Just do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Questions? Roving mic? No? Okay. All right. Questions without the roving mic then? I'm sure you must have questions of this dear gentleman with no shoes on.
Are you going to do it then?
I'm Susie DeLacy from Carmarthenshire People First, and I'm not going to give you a song because I've got this in my hand, thank God. I was interested, so I was in the workshop earlier about Twitter, right? And about how, looking at who people who inspire you are following, right? Who would you say has been most inspirational to you?
I actually said that this morning was about Twitter, and I suggested that everybody should look at who the new Archbishop of Canterbury follows. Because I worked out, I had a look this morning, he's got one more follower, me, and he follows 42 people, one of whom I'm on first name terms with. So now I know how to get to the £1 billion that the Church of England has in its festival fund. So me and Nigel will be in there first. Who do I follow and learn from? Before I started writing books in about 2000. I kind of had that big sort of midlife crisis moment. Where am I going? What am I doing? Shit, I'm getting older. And I guess a lot of us do. And I wanted to write. And I met Charles Handy, who's now 80. Wrote The Empty Raincoat. He won the prize portfolio career. Really lovely guy. Got to know him. Spent time. I got him to speak at some things I organised. That's a good way to flatter people and get their kind of support. Somebody here's already had a fine offer me to become a member of their organisation. Guess who? So never hold back, actually. But Charles, I looked at Charles Handy, and I have met him a few times, but I've sought his advice, and he's freely given it. And more importantly, what I've done is I've looked at my life and writing career and benchmarked it against his. And I think if you look at people that are at the top of their game in any game, they're usually reasonably old, because that time takes a while to get there, that whole sort of Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours to be an expert type thing. I looked at Charles, where Charles is, he's 80, so he's 23 years older than me. So what was he doing 23 years ago? Well, that's kind of where I am now. And actually, if I go back a few years behind that, there were times when I was ahead of him. And that's hugely reassuring. I think you can do that with a mentor or somebody that you can follow like that. I think it's really good to track against somebody who's ahead of you. But don't judge where you are now by where they are now, but where they were at your stage of the journey. Very profound, isn't it?
Hi, Chris from Organised Chaos. What made you stop selling fertiliser?
And you notice it's kind of a reverse cash for questions. I get them a fiver, they gave me the question. That's not how it should work, is it? I found fertiliser fascinating. I went to agricultural college. I have a tractor. I have 2.5 acres. I married a farmer's daughter. Alas, she didn't have 5,000 acres. So I had to kind of get a real job. And fertiliser was I gravitated to it, right? I sort of fell into it. And what I really liked about that was there's a whole carrot and stick existence. So every next level up the sales thing, you had more roads to drive on and more letters on the back of your Ford Sierra. And I got to be sort of national marketing manager, and then I suddenly realised that it was really boring. It was just a massive big factory on the Humber turning out loads of stuff that people bought. And it lost its appeal completely. So I went to work for a small family firm that made mobile homes. I thought mobile homes were completely to fertiliser. Indeed it was. And I did that in 1988, which just showed my grasp of the national economy and political scene at the time. Because if you were going to kill your career, going in 1988 into anything relating to housing was a pretty disastrous move. And so in 1990, they made me redundant, and I've worked for me ever since. Good question.
Right. Kind of listening to you speak and kind of talking to you earlier as well, at which point did you begin to trust yourself as a social entrepreneur? And at which point did the rest of the business community sort of accept you for who you are and stop thinking that you were completely insane, angry and passionate?
When did I come out as a social entrepreneur? It's now £2.50 per question here, by the way. You need to ask them more about it, otherwise these guys are going to get a really good deal. I wrestle with the fact that I'm just me, so I employ one person, Jess, and I kind of get involved with things, and I've learned to my cost, both kind of financially and I guess in terms of sanity, that building an organisation which is the traditional model of entrepreneurship, the expectation that you'll build a big organisation, sell it, or grow it, just doesn't work for me. I work best on the outside. There's a lovely, is it Roosevelt, Hoover quote about inside and outside the tent, but I have to be outside the tent, never inside the tent. If you know that one. And so I always wrestle with it. So entrepreneurship is an attitude, and you can have the attitude anywhere. So I meet hugely entrepreneurial people in the public sector who do amazing things despite all odds and the weight, bureaucracy, frameworks, protocols, procedures, governance, everything. They just sort of crack it. And then I meet organisations that call themselves a social enterprise or a charity, and they're kind of not enterprising or entrepreneurial at all. They're sort of a process, complete kind of mix. And the other thing, if you work on your own, as I do, and I guess some of you will do, is that you are your own brand. So you're never going to be objective about how people see you. So I'm just quite surprised at things I get asked to do, what places I find myself. I'll just keep pushing and see where you can get to. So, yeah. So, again, it's that go for it thing. Yeah, and if you get to meet your MP, then get them to get you in front of a minister. Get in front of a minister, well, it's not very far from Paul Culler's house, actually, just round to number 10, just see where you can get to there. And one of my challenges in life has always been, actually, ever since I had my own businesses and then started my own, is just to see where I can get to that I've never been before. I've been to some amazingly unusual places.
Do you think entrepreneurs are born entrepreneurs, or can they learn it throughout their life? And like your checklist for entrepreneurs, can learn something from that book?
Plug for my book. I think it'd be tragic if people rule themselves out of things they might want to do because they think you have to be born into it. You can be born into wealth or poverty. But I think entrepreneurship is something you just kind of pick up. I was really interested, if you go back a few years, then a lot of the big business names and successful people in the 1970s were Holocaust survivors. So, people that have had some profound experience, that is what drives them to do what they do. And I think you can have those profound experiences at any time in life. The Handys wrote a book together which they called The New Alchemist. I forget. One of the books they wrote them together. She took the photographs, he did the words, were about people that had just started stuff and done things. And there were people of all ages who sometimes had quite kind of ordinary lives, doing quite ordinary things. And then kind of one day, something had just changed and they'd gone and done it. So I suppose I would say that entrepreneurs are born out of experience or something that happens rather than being something you're born with. Kind of born with arms, legs, and the ability to learn to speak. That entrepreneurship is kind of more acquired.
What if you're slightly lacking in profound experiences that the world around you has been too good to you? The profound experience. Yeah,
If your life has been devoid of profound experiences, which is kind of question, what do you do? Well, you could try catching the 2:45 train from Paddington to Swansea yesterday, because that took me to some places I wasn't expecting to go, including Gloucester. I thought you can't kind of force yourself into it. You can't kind of, if you've just been really lucky and life's been great, then that's good. You kind of go looking for those things. Although I suppose there are kind of, there's a need for people who can help other people on that kind of journey, the facilitators, the enablers. Because one of the problems when you get really passionate about something is objectivity goes out the window. So behind every kind of great entrepreneurial leader, there's usually somebody who's fairly good at just making sure that the numbers work and that they turn up where they're supposed to turn up and they do those kind of basic things. And so, there are people who hunt and people who farm. And it's that kind of thing. So I wouldn't knock yourself because you haven't had a profound experience. Although, it can be arranged. going to have real workshops today, by the way?
Sorry, I'm Sue Leonard, Pembrokeshire Association of Voluntary Services. How would you suggest that Wales is a small country, relatively speaking, and my observation is it needs entrepreneurs and social businesses more now than ever before. But how do we unlock that? Because what's happening is what you've just alluded to, is that we're reverting to a plethora of strategies, action plans. We have a social enterprise action plan, you'll be glad to know, in Wales. And Welsh government, local government, micromanaging, monitoring, and if I could say to you that European funding is killing off all creativity, innovation, risk-taking, because you have to employ armies of bureaucrats, administrators, to count the beans, literally count coffee beans. We've been asked to justify using a jar of coffee for a meeting for 10 people. What happened to the rest of the coffee? So how do we unlock enterprise in Wales when we're being crushed by bureaucracy?
I love that, because I've been going to Romania recently, and there's a European funded project, and I use my iPhone BA app to download my boarding pass, but I also have to print one out for evidence that I went. So it's completely crazy. Let me talk about Mary Portas for a minute. So I often talk about Mary Portas, and I haven't been rude about her, and I kind of owe it to Wales to be rude about Mary Portas. Mary Portas and her Market Towns initiative, there's lots good about it, yeah? But what I hate is the fact that lots of good people get themselves together to try to win 100 grand to do what she thinks is right for Market Towns. And I think that every town is different, every community has an identity, and wherever I go and speak to business groups, particularly business groups of traders in small towns, it's like, so work out what you want to do, work out what makes your place unique, pledge some money yourselves, so 50 people put 100 quid on the table, or 1,000 on the table, or 100 people, 50, 500 on the table, that's 50 grand, isn't that it? So 100 people, 500 each, pledged businesses, and then go to your local, we have LEPs, you have LEPs, all that sort of crazy stuff, but the people that work with government and us, and say, this is what we want to do, this is what we're prepared to pledge, go and get it matched. So start at the grassroots with what you want to do, what you want to achieve, get the local commitment and define it, and then go looking for support. Because the only reason we get these dumb top-down type things, I think, is because nobody's suggesting stuff at the grassroots. So they measure all these sort of these indices of deprivation and stuff, and work out really sort of wacky ideas to solve it, and then try and impose it on you, as you say, with huge bureaucracy. So I think it's up to us to start suggesting things, offering match funding, particularly for businesses that will profit from the game, and then go for it.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that enlightening experience. You're now going to put your shoes back on. Oh no, sorry, you've got your workshop. Quickly.
So what I thought would be fun now, just a bit of a mind opener. So I was going to talk about, very briefly, a real organisation, which is a charity going through this kind of change. And I suppose it's about sort of mind opening. So this is a disability charity. They've been going for 45 years. They're based somewhere near London, I won't say any more than that. And they were getting their million turnover, and of that, $250,000 came from the council every year, really comfortably. And for me, they were the classic case where the council say, you're doing great stuff, here's £250,000. Every year they said that, every year they had a conversation, every year they failed to measure what they're getting for their money, until like a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden they said, actually we're going to cut your funding because we don't know what you do. So the crisis then is, so what do we do? They didn't really know, they weren't measuring what they're doing with the money. And the council, how do you prove that? And when I actually got a copy of the contract between the council and the organisation, it was so fluffy and full of unmeasurables that it was unreal. So you could understand why the accountancy people and the council were putting lines through it, because they couldn't see what they're getting for their money. So it wasn't an issue. for them anyway. Second issue is that the CEO is 68, and her deputy John is 72. So they're kind of slightly, although they're not past their sell-by date, they're planning to retire in the next 18 months. And there's no real succession plan, and there's no real talent within the organisation there's no desire amongst people in the organisation to fill those two spaces. Some of the things they do aren't profitable. They do a really fantastic community transport service, getting particularly older people, disabled people, to doctor's appointments and to community hospitals, which, because taxis won't take them, the buses won't take them, they can't do anything else, but it loses money every year, about 50 grand. They retail equipment. They have a place about the size of this, actually, which is full of Zimmer frames and all sorts of exciting things. So when we have meetings there, we all sit in these chairs that go up and down. It's great fun in the showroom. It scares yeah, it does kind of scare the visitors, actually, the customers, but we can't do that. And everybody's really, really busy. Or they're trying stuff online. And they're that kind of classic panacea, we'll sell online because the number in the world will come and buy from us. And to be fair, the USP with selling online is that you can ring up and talk to an occupational therapist so that what you're ordering is the right thing, rather than just buying it from Amazon. But there's nothing to stop people, apart from Amazon's current poor press about their tax payments in the UK. There's nothing really to stop people taking the advice and then going to Amazon and buying the same thing but 10% cheaper, 10% less. And just to compound things, they had a fundraiser who got fed up because her job was to raise money, but it's quite difficult to know what she's raising money for. So it was like, we need to raise money, 80 grand a year, to fill the gap. Things are improving quite nicely. She just got fed up and went somewhere else. They have a brilliant marketing intern who they've just won funding to keep on, a graduate. He sussed that if you leave university, haven't got a job to go to, if you do something useful, then it kind of helps you stay current. But that's kind of where they are, which is not atypical, not unusual, not atypical. Does that resonate with some of you, where you might be, or know people who are like that? And every time you talk to the council, they say, "Oh, we really value you," but they don't pay. Some of the council say, "We really need you," but they kind of won't pay. So here come my traffic lights. What would you do if you were a 68-year-old CEO or a 72-year-old finance guy, both looking to retire, both having been there for a long, long time, both wondering where to go next? So do you just go hell for leather writing funding bids? And there are people that do that, aren't there? Do you have professional bid writers here in Carmarthenshire? Will spend ages waiting through the paperwork and writing it for you? Yeah. I think the grant makers can sort of see through that. Do you kind of grow your sales, but then you lose sight, the debate they have, but then you lose sight of it being a charity or a social enterprise even. What are you doing that's charitable apart from transport? And the other interesting thing is that they have they're good people, they have their 6 months turnover in reserves. So with all this poverty, they're sitting on basically 400 grand. Do they throw that at that last ditch attempt to grow? So and I think that's kind of the real situation that a lot of people are in. Would you agree with that? Yeah. So who would go for the and the traffic lights actually there's no hidden message in the colours and the really. So how many people would just go flat out for writing lots of bids? No? Good people. Who would go for growing sales? Some of you surely, yeah, that's pretty good. And how many would be brave enough to invest your reserves in doing that? And how many of you who would do that have got trustees who would say, no way? Yeah, one. There's a whole issue with trustees too, isn't there? They kind of say they can't change the people, change the people. It's quite difficult sometimes to change people. And I don't know what happens here as well. I know that one or two organisations I've worked with where I live in East Anglia, where when the going gets tough and the CEO gets brave, then the CEO suddenly finds out. And often tragically it's the founding CEO, the person that original campaigning, maybe a long time ago, they find they get themselves voted out of the job by their board, or managed out of the job. And then it kind of goes somewhere completely different. So, but the bits that I haven't put on the list that I think are really quite relevant, that I don't know, one is merger. I think there's going to be a huge amount of consolidation. So when you're talking in the next sort of half an hour in the groups and discussion bit, just think about that as an option for people, not necessarily for yourselves, but for others. There's a fascinating big lottery brand at the moment around people that deliver frontline services where you can pitch for money to bring together you and other organisations, so that instead of having 5 people going up the lane, up the footpath to the front of the house, one helping with disability, one with blindness, one with hearing, one with something else, they can all be one person. So you can kind of work together. I think that closes in January. Are you going for that? No, that's quite good. Big lottery thing. The other big issue with all of this for me is about succession. And I wonder whether bringing forward the retirement of the chief exec and the deputy and getting a real kind of ex-John Lewis partnership, dynamic retail expert would change the organisation and then somehow make sure that the conscience is kept in place by the trustees. And as I said, a whole lot of stuff is about partnership. Fascinating that all around the country there are disability advice charities. These guys have spent about 20 grand on the super website. Wouldn't it be nice if it could be sort of a new front page for each organisation? So you could have a Welsh version over here for who could use and get the advice locally and buy the kit from there and share the thing, like the affiliate scheme that Amazon have. So there's kind of a whole world of opportunities and things that you can do. And I think one of the other workshops happening right now and later, repeated, luckily, is around creativity, isn't it? So it is about doing things that are different. And I think there's never been a time when it hasn't been so important to do things that are different, because what we've always done just doesn't kind of work anymore. Which brings me back to your organisations, yeah? So now I'm doing all the talking, you're doing all the listening, and that's kind of the wrong way around. So what I thought would be fun would be to have, and I've got, how many have I got? I've got kind of 4 conversations, or subjects for conversations. So we have kind of 6 minutes on each. Then you won't solve the problem, you won't get all the answers, but it'll get you starting, and then you've got all lunchtime to keep talking amongst yourselves while you eat and stuff like that. That was a good thing to do. And the first is kind of this, and it links back to my elevator pitch in a way, but where are you heading? So what will you be doing we'll see it now. But what will you be doing in 2013? Could you repeat that sort of round the group conversation you had earlier by saying in 2013 we will be doing 4, which means that, and kind of trying to identify what the changes are that we're trying to make? Is that achievable? You enthusiastic about doing that? Yeah. You smiling? Yeah. Go for it. I might kind of walk around and interfere as well. Okay, folks, I'll let you have more than I meant to there, because I got distracted and lobbied intensely by a fantastic project at the back of the room. I thought it was the naughty corner, and actually I was the one who was naughty because I got way late. But the tip there is never ever miss out on an opportunity for a serendipitous conversation. So how was that? Do you know each other even better than you did before? Yeah? I'm not sure how I can get you to give me any kind of feedback. It's quite difficult because you're all right there and I'm here, and it will take even longer. But has that been useful? Do you have a better understanding of each other and what you're trying to do? Was it easy to do? Yeah. So shall I go to the next one? Will that be good? And then you can just talk amongst yourselves again some more and pretend that you're doing it? No, not really. Oh, the other thing that when I was lobbying back, I was asked for my business cards, and I realised that I brought a whole bag of business cards. So when you go to lunch, if you want to, you can pick one up from the bag at the front, and it's kind of interesting and entertaining, and you might like it. So this for me is really, really important, and this is kind of again back to that, in a way, that networking thing. But it's very much about who are the people who can help you get where you want to get to. Who are the people you need to influence? So I always cheat with this, to be honest. So I've done quite a few sort of those board away days where they get somebody who's different to kind of liven it up a bit. somebody they can blame for all the things that are said that shouldn't have been said when they go home, and I like doing that. And I did one for a project in London, which was it's called Drake Music Project actually, and they work with kids with severe physical disability around producing music, and lots of fantastic software and stuff, and they wanted to do an orchestral type thing and all sorts of things like that. And I organised a Broadway day at a concert venue, Snape Maltings in Suffolk, largely because I like it, and because it was on the marshes and it was away from London, it was somewhere they hadn't been before. And I got the venue's education officer, and somebody else I think from the organisation, to sit in on the day. That was kind of the deal. I'll bring these people here, they're going to have this away day, going to go through their strategy. Really good to have a few wild cards in the room, one of which I'd like to be you. And I always do that, I always bring people in who are not part of the organisation. So when at the end of the day they came to the conclusion that what they really wanted to do is to stage a high-level concert in a nationally recognised venue, and they had to make that decision when they're sitting in a venue like that, and in the room was the person who'd been there all day, who had the ability to do that. So you kind of guarantee the win, really, by involving the people that you want to work with and helping you reach the conclusion that you kind of pre-guessed a bit that that's what you want to happen. So that's how I work with those sorts of things, and I think there's nothing kind of wrong with cheating a bit to get the result that you want. But then the second thing, so what we do now is kind of do this really, use this sort of track, so to see we need who and who else to help us by doing what, and doing what has to be kind of realistic. So when it's a really big ask, as my concert venue thing was a big ask, I spent all day with them getting to know, getting under the person I wanted to influence, getting under the skin of the organisation. If I wanted to suggest that the Church of England was hugely dramatically innovative and interesting and social enterprising, then I would probably be working, as I said earlier, on my friend Jan to get to the Archbishop and then kind of work around from there. But you here in the room, there'll be people, the things that you want to do, there'll be people who are either in the room or known to the people in the room who can make that happen for you. So it's kind of the first rule of networking is you don't ask people to do something for you, you ask them to introduce you to somebody who can do things for you. Because then the 50 or so people here become an audience of 500, and then it gets really sort of interesting. And of course you can use LinkedIn as somebody here was talking about it a minute ago. So do we do that now? Is that okay? Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit more about the patrons? What about patrons? Should we all?
Yeah, actually, I think, really good point. I think patrons are really important. Because when you have a charity and you have a patron, and normally you get all the big tops in the patch to put their name on their letterhead, don't you? And they come out once a year and they pat you on the head and they shake a few hands and they eat some canapes and drink a glass of wine and then they kind of go back again. And they do this like once a week for all the different organisations which they're a patron. But I'm a patron one and two, so I do a bit of that as well. But actually it's really good to get the patrons should be people that can open all those doors for you. They should be championing you at a high level, and you're shaking your head because they don't. The charity I talked about earlier, the case study, this will kind of give it away a bit. One of their patrons is Grant Shapps. That's the minister with a pseudonym, yeah, and a business writing self-help book. But actually, he was really good because when it came to the crunch about how we're going to reduce the taper of the funding decline from the charity, when it came to challenge from the council, we were getting all sorts of negative vibes from the council. So what we did was we got another patron who had Hatfield Hall, a massive great big house, and Grant Shapps, the MP, the leader of the council, and we had kind of a bit of a mini summit in this big swanky place. And the guy from the council turned up with a massive, great big pile, a foot thick of papers and documents, which was his evidence gathered by officers to help him defend cutting their payments straight off. And he kind of left with the paper having done him no good at all, having agreed to taper over 4 years. So that was a situation where a patron, who was a politician, was really, really helpful. And I kind of have to say that politicians, excepting one that didn't turn up this morning, can be exceptionally helpful. And of course, if you have a politician as a patron, there's a danger of being seen to be politically biased, and that's a risk. Well, I was delighted to see that Meryl was independent. She could be a patron in the organising world, that'd be great. But when if you if you have an issue with somebody or an organisation, you kind of write to a member of parliament and copy all the right people in and say nice things about all the other people, but then to identify what the big issue is. I'm doing this now with apprenticeships. You kind of get all the right people, all the people who you copied in and been nice about, pass it up to their senior people who then work out ways to make it happen. But it isn't about patron, that's about sort of lobbying in a way. So for me, and of course, if you start as a social enterprise and not as a charity, then you wouldn't necessarily normally have patrons. You might have non-executive directors. You might have a board of non-execs that kind of give their time, a bit like trustees do. But you can still have a patron, couldn't you, or a champion? But they always aim really high and always give them something to do. Does that help? So you have a chat. I have sensed that you are kind of naturally gravitating into the next question at the same time as the one I'm doing now, which is what's in it for them. Because the sad reality of I think, life in the world today is that people don't do things for nothing. There has to be something in it for them, even if it makes them feel good in some kind of way. And there's a whole lot of stuff there about public sector funders and what makes them feel good or get re-elected. So just think about as you continue these conversations about, are you going to save the money? Are you going to save by the police authority 25% of the street crime budget by introducing big issue? Fantastic example. Are you going to make life easier? And easier can be part of that. Because a lot of this stuff is about emotional. People buy things or say yes things for emotional reasons, not logical things. That emotion is what you make a decision on, and then logic is how you justify the expenditure. So people don't want lots and lots of things happening, so if you can take it away, they'll pay you for it. And often I think for people who, again, you're working with, it's about organisations, large organisations, about their career prospects. How can you give the rising star in the NHS, I guess how can you give the rising stars in the NHS those lovely case studies they talk about when they go for promotion job interviews? And if I was looking at things around health, I kind of think about that, particularly with the NHS, because it is a bit of a nightmare organisation. And how can you help somebody get promoted? There's two things. One is they support you, and the second thing, of course, is that if they do climb up the organisations, they can help you some more later, with more money at a high level. Just have a think about that for a minute.
Yes, sorry.
I'll interrupt you again, because I have kind of a cunning plan. Yeah, and the cunning plan is that the lunch is there, and a lot of it's hot, and we're nearest to it. So the last question I was going to get to work on, which is what does success look like for you? And I'll say for your community of interest, because I love the phrase, even if I'm not always hung up or always excited about the community interest company structure, which I think lots of people put around their necks and sort of throttle themselves with. But what does success look like for everybody you want to influence? I'd like really, really important. Everybody who you work with, be it a collaborator, be it a patron, be it a service user, be it a funder, be it yourself, has to know what's in it for them. And that has to be kind of measured. And that's really what I'm going to get into while I'm doing my kind of standing up and talking bit after lunch in my attempt to keep people awake. Because lunch, I've noticed as lunch in Wales always seems to be, is predominantly carbohydrates, which is kind of good if you're running a half marathon weekend, as I am, but pretty awful if you're trying to lose weight, as I'm sure none of you are. And so, considering my reputation, the fact that you can heckle me horribly after lunch when all the others are there, and I really want you to be nice to me, and because I did say that this is about 7 steps from that sort of that detox journey, which you'll notice I haven't gone anywhere near yet. I will briefly give you a preview of what's coming later, so that you can say, hand on heart, he did what he said he was going to do. And I think this is kind of where we've been. So I think the most important thing is know where you are. What's the starting point? And it's kind of like that Irish joke about if you're going there, I wouldn't start from here. But tragically, a lot of you are starting from places you don't want to be. But that's kind of reality, that's where you are. And denial doesn't really help. I think that accepting the inevitability of change is a massive step, often for trustees of charities who want to keep measuring everything that doesn't matter, because they know that the really big thing they can't kind of influence is just getting closer and closer and blocking out all the light. The great thing about Excel is that you can do this Control-Right command on a spreadsheet, and you can make your projections for the next 3 years look utterly, totally, amazingly fantastic. But unfortunately, real life isn't quite as easy. There isn't a Control-Right shortcut for real life. So plans have to be realistic, and I think with apologies to the odd consultant in the room who might write business plans and marketing plans, I just love to see that kind of single page that's oozing passion and commitment, which is what we saw from Nigel earlier, isn't it? Yeah, people were invested in because of what he believes in, what he's doing, not because of how articulate his plan is. A great plan and a crap organisation and just died straight away. There's a whole lot of stuff about changing organisations. I think that people, sometimes you have to cut stuff out, and that's a harsh reality, but you have to do it. You've got to know what things cost and what their prices are. And I think there's almost a whole course of therapy, isn't it, for people in the social enterprise world about cost and price, about how much can you charge and get away with it, or how much should you charge and who's paying and all the ethics of that. And I always think we just think about the big nasty corporate people that will charge lots of money anyway. But that reminds me, I'll tell a story about that after lunch. We talked about patrons a little bit earlier, but I think mentors and guides are really important too. So find somebody that's already doing what you're doing and doing it well somewhere else in the country and get them to give you some shortcuts. They like doing that. And unlike Adrian Mole, rather like Adrian Mole, measure what matters most. Just measure 2 or 3 key things. I think Nigel talked about, was it Kibble in Scotland, about what do people think of my organisation, what do the service users think. That's the key measure, I make that the key measure. And that really is our key. The others are at the back of the room. You are between them and lunch, so I'll suggest that you go for it. Thank you. And don't forget to grab our business cards as you go past with my very indiscreetly placed chair, upon which is also placed a copy of the book that you might want to steal. Glance at.